Hey folks, in this episode I'm going to show you how to make this cavity grime mask. This cavity mask can be used in Cycles and eevee. It's a good way to add details onto your models and to improve realism. It should be a fairly straightforward tutorial, so without further ado, let's get to it. So open up Blender, we're going to go to Edit, Preferences, and under Add-ons we're going to search for Node and then enable the Node Wrangler here. Once you've enabled that, we're going to go to System, and then under Network we're going to enable the Allow Online Access. Once you've enabled that, we're going to go to Get Extensions and search for A.N.T, and then we're going to install the A.N.T Landscape add-on. Once you've installed that, just go to your add-ons and then search for A.N.T, and then just ensure that the A.N.T Landscape add-on is enabled. When you've enabled those two add-ons, we're going to go down here, we're going to click this button, click Save Preferences, and that will ensure the add-ons load every time we load Blender. I'll then close this window up here. So in my scene, I'm just going to select everything and I'll hit delete. I'll then hit Shift A, I'm going to go mesh and I'm going to choose landscape. I'll then navigate to the bottom left and expand the landscape options. For my X and Y subdivisions, I'm going to set this to 256 for now. I'll probably increase this to 512 for the final. I'll navigate to the operator presets at the top here. I'll expand these options and I'm going to navigate down and choose Tech Effect. I'll then select Random Seed. I'm going to set this to 7. You can change this to whatever you like. I'm going to reduce my noise size to 0.25. I'm going to change my noise type from marble to shattered terrain. I'm going to change my depth to 2. I'm going to change the dimensions to 2. I'm going to change the linearity to 1. And finally, I'll change the distortion to 2. I'll just scroll up. For the effect type, I'm going to change it from Tech to Rings. I'll decrease the effect size to 0.5. I'm going to increase the depth to 2. I'll reduce the amplitude to 0.15. I'm going to reduce the intensity to minus 0.40. And under the display settings, I'm going to set the minimum to 0. For the fall off, I'm going to set this to X and Y. And I think I'll be happy with those settings there. Now the only thing left for me to do is increase the subdivisions on the X and Y. So I'm going to increase mine to 512. Obviously, by increasing the subdivisions, it's going to slow your computer down. So just go easy with these settings here. When all the bugs are fixed in Blender 5, this should work a lot better because Blender 5 is equipped to deal with high dense meshes. When you're happy with your settings, we'll just click into the viewport and that menu will disappear. So all those settings are now baked in. I'll just increase this window. I'm going to change this from the timeline to the shader editor. I'll then click New to add a new material and we'll rename the material to Cavity Detail. I'll just hit N to hide the N panel. I'll make this window a little bit bigger. I'll navigate over to my render settings over here. I got my render engine currently set to eevee. So if your render engine is set to eevee, just ensure that you enable ray tracing. For this tutorial, I'm going to change my render engine to Cycles. I'll then change my device type from CPU to GPU. I'll navigate down to where it says Light Paths and I'm just going to disable Reflective and Refractive Caustics. I'll go to my World tab over here and I'm going to turn the strength all the way down to 0. Now if I go into rendered view, we won't see anything because I haven't got any lights in my scene. I'll just go back to solid view. I'll then hit Shift A. I'm going to go Light and I'm going to choose Sun. I'll then hit Numpad 1 to go into front view. I'm going to hit G, Z, hold down Control, snap it to the grid, and I'm just going to bring the sun up to around about there. I'll now go into rendered view. I'll then navigate to the light data tab down here. I'm going to set the strength to 5 and I'm going to increase the angle to 180 and that should provide a completely flat lighting scenario. I'll then hit Shift A. I'm going to go light and I'll choose sun. I'll just hit Numpad 3 to go into side view. I'll hit G, Z, I'm going to hold down Control to snap it to the grid and I'm going to bring it up to around about there. I'll then hit R, hold down Control to snap it in increments, Numpad 7 to go into top view, and maybe I'll hit R and I'll just rotate it 45 degrees on the Z axis. I'll then navigate to my outliner and I'll hide that sun lamp from the viewport. I'm going to select the original sun. I'm just going to change the tone to a blue colour, maybe something around there, and I'll decrease the strength to 1. So this blue light is going to simulate the sky, so all the shadows are going to be blue rather than black. Maybe I can tone down the saturation on the colour for that lamp. I'll then unhide the second sun in the outliner. I'll select the second sun. I'm going to change this to a very light yellow colour, something around there, and maybe I can set the strength to 2. I'll select my landscape object, and in my outliner I'll rename it to cavity detail, I'll increase my shader editor. I'm going to select this principal BSDF. I'll hit Shift D to duplicate it, and I'll pop it up here. I'll then hit Shift A, go to shader, and we're going to choose mix shader, and I'll pop that over here. I'll connect the top principal BSDF into the top socket of the mix shader, and the bottom BSDF into the bottom socket of the mix shader. I'll then plug the mix shader into the surface socket of the material output. I'll change the color of the top principal BSDF to black. I'll select the top principal BSDF. I'm going to hit F to add a frame, and I'll rename it to cavity shader. I'll select the bottom principal BSDF. I'm going to hit F to add a frame, and I'll rename it to base shader. So the cavity mask is going to be based on the ambient occlusion node. So I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go input, and we'll choose ambient occlusion. I'll pop that there. I'm going to change the distance to 2. I'll then hit Shift A, I'm going to go converter, and we'll choose color ramp. I'll pop that down here. I'll connect the color socket from the ambient occlusion into the factor of the color ramp, and then the color socket from the color ramp into the factor of the mix shader. On my color ramp, I'm going to change the interpolation type from linear to ease. I'll then drag this black flag across all the way to around about there. Maybe I can bring it back a bit on the white, and you can see we're starting to get these cavities appear. Maybe I can change the colour of the cavity shader to something more prominent. Maybe I'll go for an orange colour for now, just so we can see the cavity mask. The ambient occlusion node on its own does provide a good cavity mask, but we're going to take this a step further. So I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go input, and we'll choose texture coordinate. Shift A, we're going to go vector, and we'll choose mapping. Shift A, we go texture, and we're going to choose noise texture. Shift A, we go converter, and we'll choose color ramp, and we'll pop that there. I'm going to connect the object coordinates to the vector of the mapping node, the vector from the mapping node to the vector of the noise texture, and finally the factor from the noise texture into the factor of the color ramp. I'm going to change the noise texture from 3D to 4D. I'll just box select these nodes here. I'm going to hit G, and I'm just going to bring them back to around about there. I'll then hit Shift A, I'm going to go color, and we'll choose mix color, and I'll pop that in there. I'll then unplug the color ramp from socket A and plug it into the mix factor of the mix color node. I'll then take the colour from this colour ramp into socket A of the mix colour node, and for socket B we're going to change this to 100% white. I'll change the interpolation type on this colour ramp from linear to ease. I'll then take this white flag, and I'm going to set the position to 0.75. I'll then drag this black flag all the way across over to round about there. And for the noise texture, I'm going to set the scale to 10. I'll change the detail to 8, and I'm going to increase the roughness to 0.75. As you can see, in our viewport, our cavity mask is no longer one solid gradient. It's broken up by the noise texture. So if I just drag this color socket from the color ramp into the mix factor on the mix shader, you can see we're getting a solid mask. But by breaking it up with this noise texture, we're getting more of a natural feel. Zoom out. I'm going to box select all of these nodes here. I'll then hit G and bring them across over to here. I'll then hit F to add a frame, and I'll rename the frame to cavity mask. I'll just hit N to open up the N panel, and on your node tab over here we'll enable color. I'll just expand these options, and I'll just give this a custom color, maybe something around there. I'll just hit N to hide the N panel. So with this cavity mask, you can use it to drive the base color, metallic, roughness, and any other factor in any of your shaders. Personally, I prefer to use it as a mix factor with a mix shader, so then I can have my base shader as one material and then my cavity shader as another material. I'll just give you a quick demonstration how we can use this. So I'll just take these nodes here, I'm going to hit G, bring them across. I'll take this base shader, I'm going to hit G, bring this down here. I'm going to load up some image textures. So with the principal BSDF selected in my base shader frame, I'm going to hit Ctrl-Shift-T. I'm going to load up all the image textures for this texture here. I'll select the reflection map, the normal map, the glossy map, and the color map. Maybe I can select the displacement map as well. I'll then click Principal Texture Setup. I'll just hit G, just bring this down. I'm going to disconnect the displacement node. In fact, I'll delete the displacement node and the displacement texture. I don't have a UV map for this mesh, so I'll change the texture coordinates from UV to object, and maybe I can reduce the scale to 0.5. Okay, I think I need to brighten up the scene a little, so I'm going to select this second sun lamp, and I'm going to set the strength to 5. I'll reselect the cavity detail object. I'll then select this cavity shader frame. I'll just move this up to here. I'll then select the principal BSDF. I'll hit Ctrl-Shift-T to open up a new texture. Maybe I'll go for this texture here. I'll select the reflection map, the gloss map, the normal map, and the colour map. I'll then click Principled Texture Setup. I'll just hit G, bring these up to here. Again, I haven't got a UV map, so I'm going to change the texture coordinates from UV to object. We're getting a bit of stretching here, so maybe I can change my image textures from flat to box. I'll also do the same for these image textures, change it from flat to box. There we go, we've eliminated some of the stretching there. Excellent. I think the image textures on this cavity shader is a bit small, so I'm going to reduce the scale to 0.5. We can add variation to any of these image textures. So I hit Shift A, I'm going to go Colour, and we'll choose Mix Colour, and I'll pop that in here. I'll then connect the colour socket from the base colour image texture into socket B. I'll then hit Shift A, I'm going to go Colour, and we'll choose RGB Curves, and I'll pop that in the bottom socket. I'll just change the mix factor to 1 on here, and I'm going to bring this colour down to around about there, just so it's a lot darker. And now we can use a noise texture for this mix factor here. So I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go Texture, and we'll choose Noise Texture. I'll pop that there. Shift A, we go Input, and we'll choose Texture Coordinate, and I'll pop that over here. I'll then connect the object coordinates to the vector of the noise texture. I'll change the noise texture to 4D. I'll then hit Shift A, I'm going to go Converter, and we'll choose Color Ramp. I'll pop that here. I'll change the interpolation type from linear to ease. I'll connect the factor from the noise texture to the factor of the color ramp, and then the color from the color ramp into the mix factor of the mix color node. Maybe I can set the black flag to 0.4, and I'll set the white flag to 0.6. And now we can change the scale on this image texture. And as you can see, it's creating a bit of variation for the image textures. Maybe I'll increase the scale to 40. I'll increase the detail to 4, and maybe increase the roughness to 0.75. We can also do the same hack for the image texture down here. So I could just box select all of these nodes here. I'll then hit Shift D to duplicate, and I'll pop them down here. I'll connect the color socket from the base color image texture into the color socket of the RGB curves. I'll then connect the color socket to socket A of the mix color node, and I'll plug the results from the mix color node into the base color of the Principled BSDF. I'm going to reduce the scale to 20, maybe 10. Maybe I don't want it as dark. So for this RGB curves, I'll just bring this up slightly, and maybe I'll select the red channel, and I can bring the reds up ever so slightly. So this is one way of using the cavity mask. So I'm done with all these image textures. So I'm going to delete all these textures. I'll delete these. I'll box select all of these. I'll hit delete. I'll just rearrange these nodes. It's a good idea to save your project. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to save my project as Like and Subscribe. Thanks folks, you absolute legends. And then click Save As. This cavity mask setup is a really powerful mask. As I demonstrated, you can use it to drive image textures, but you can also use it to drive procedural materials as well. You don't necessarily have to use two Principled BSDFs. For example, I could plug this Principled BSDF into the surface of the material output. I could then hit Shift A, I'll go Color, and we'll choose Mix Color. I'll hover my cursor over that color swatch. I'm going to hit Control C to copy. I'll then hit Control V and Control V to paste that color in there. And for this top color swatch, maybe I could turn it into a dark green, for example. I'll then connect the cavity mask into the mix factor of the mix color node, and then plug the result from the mix color node into the base color of the Principled BSDF. And this way, we're only using the one BSDF shader. I'm just going to connect the original setup to the material output. I'll then delete this mix color node. Don't be afraid to experiment with the cavity mask. As I mentioned before, you can use it to drive metallic, roughness, index of refraction, alpha, or any other factor with any other shader. You could, in theory, even use it to drive the scale and detail of a noise texture, for example. I'm going to create two bonus procedural materials, one for this cavity shader and one for the base shader. And if you join me on Patreon as a free member, you'll have access to that file alongside other Blender files from previous tutorials. That's the tutorial in a nutshell. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please click like and subscribe. It really helps my channel. Have a great day, level up, and thanks for watching.